there's so many people that question whether or not I have, you know, disordered eating and whether or not I struggle with anorexia. And they like to troll me often, and they're usually like, oh, like you have a hard time feeding your body. And like, obviously, anyone that's in, you know, a larger body knows that we hear that all the time, right? So anyway, the thought pops into my head like, of course I have a hard time feeding my body. I literally have been told my entire life that I don't deserve to feed my body.
Yo-yo and hello, my name is Lydia, and on today's episode of my 25-pound yo-yo, we will be discussing childhood trauma and how it can affect our behavior as adults. To begin, I am not a psychologist, psychiatrist, therapist, or any sort of medical professional. The information presented here is purely from my own research and my own experiences with trauma. If you relate to anything presented here, this is not a substitute for real treatment. Please do consult a mental health care provider. Also, as the information is based solely from my own personal story, I am very aware that it likely does not align exactly to other people's trauma stories. I will first be speaking generally about how trauma can affect the behavior of adults. Then I will tell you my personal story. And lastly, I will draw a comparison to what I think may be happening with Tess Holliday. Again, I'm not a professional. I'm speaking of this the same way as I do weight loss. I'm not a dietitian or personal trainer, but I have lost weight. Likewise, I'm not a mental health professional, but I have experienced trauma and have been going to therapy for it. So I would like to share with you what I have learned. So with that out of the way, let's get into it. Every time I read or hear an interview with Tess Holliday, I think there must be some unresolved trauma under there. She seems to have had a rough childhood, and that may have changed her brain chemistry and shaped the person that she is today. Trauma can produce new core beliefs of oneself, drive people to overcompensate, trigger maladaptive behaviors, and create false narratives. So, to begin, let's watch this next clip about how childhood trauma can shape our behavior, then come back and discuss. Trauma is an emotional response to a terrible event like an accident, assault, or natural disaster. Childhood trauma is usually the result of a series of traumatic incidents rather than one large event. This can include things like bullying or emotional abuse. When trauma occurs, our developing brains alter our core beliefs. These are not simply negative thoughts. These are our internal truths. When stresses manifest out of these core beliefs, it can be a lot to handle. At first, we may try to overcompensate against the belief in an effort to prove to the world that they are wrong about us. But the problem with that is that on the inside, we don't truly believe it. The negative core belief persists, and many of us cope with it by using maladaptive behaviors. These behaviors temporarily calm the stresses, but never completely remove them. And since the effort required to overcompensate is inauthentic to our true selves, it's exhausting, which makes the maladaptive behavior even stronger. Because the maladaptive behavior feels better than living in constant turmoil, we become protective of it and seek ways to do it at all costs. This usually involves creating a false narrative. The false narrative protects our maladaptive behavior and even justifies it. We then go through life carefully picking evidence that supports our false narrative and twist and contort contrary information to fit our false narrative. If we attempt to stop our maladaptive behavior by simply stopping it, it will usually come back if we haven't addressed the core belief underneath it. Many trauma sufferers that cope with a maladaptive behavior never get better, because the coping mechanism provides relief from the core belief that's destroying their soul. The only real way out is to challenge, dismantle, and disprove the core belief. And to do that means revisiting and healing from the initial trauma. This is not easy and is recommended to be done with a qualified therapist. So I'm going to first go through all the pieces discussed in the clip using my own personal story as reference. After, I will do the same thing with Tess Holliday as my example. When I was little, I was bullied a lot. For 3 straight years, older girls would chase me home from school, yelling all sorts of racial slurs and telling me to go back to my own country. As I grew into adolescence, boys did not like me. And even those that did were embarrassed to be seen with me by their friends and family. I remember when I was in grade 6 and asked a boy to dance, his response was, "What do you think I am, a monkey or something?" For a little 11-year-old, this was heartbreaking and made me feel so worthless. When I was 16, I had a boyfriend that I was crazy about. But when he introduced me to his parents, I overheard his father telling him that I was nice, but not the type of girl he should get too serious with because he should ultimately marry someone that was white. These events had a dramatic impact on my core belief of myself. I was not simply hurt. I felt worthless and unlovable. Because I felt so undesirable, I began acting like I was confident. I'd hold my head up and appear almost snobby. I wanted to show that their words didn't hurt, but they did. That was a big problem of growing up in the 80s and 90s. We were told to simply not let words get to you. You know, the old saying, sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me. But the truth is, they did hurt. The confidence I projected was just an act. I also began to dress in a manner to show myself off, to say to the world, it's your loss if you don't want this. But it was all fake. I didn't believe it, and keeping up the act, well, that was draining. I then escalated the faux confidence into destructive attention-seeking behavior. I wanted attention, and I didn't care who got in my way of it. It didn't matter to me if I was in a relationship or if the person I was flirting with was also in a relationship. I just needed attention. The little dopamine bursts I'd get from getting attention helped soothe my inner feelings of worthlessness. I believed that I'd never be able to feel loved, so this was the next best thing. Because I believed I wasn't lovable so deeply, I also didn't believe it when anyone said they loved me. I simply couldn't accept it. Instead, I'd project my own feelings of worth back on them with an eye roll or say, "No, you don't." My false narrative was that I wasn't actually hurting anyone by my behavior because you can't hurt people that don't care about you. And if they did show that they were hurt, I told myself, oh, that's not love, it's control. And because they were trying to control me, I was allowed to indulge in my maladaptive behavior. Over time, I became increasingly defensive of my false narrative and needed to protect it. Because without my false narrative, there was no justification for my maladaptive behavior. Without the narrative, I was just a bad person. The biggest problem in my false narrative was that from time to time, I'd get real proof. I'd receive a racist comment or a dig from a friend or family member, and it would make me think, see, nobody cares about me. See, the world does hate me. See, I'll never be good enough. All of which strengthened my core belief that I wasn't lovable and nobody would ever want to be in a real relationship with me. I couldn't separate the actions of individual trolls from the bigger picture of my life. I did have a network of people that genuinely cared for and loved me, but because I didn't care for or love myself or feel worthy of care and love, I couldn't accept it. I shut down any expression of love as fake. And I shut down any expression of hurt I inflicted as crocodile tears. I was insolent. And I believed I was entitled to feel and behave the way I did because of my strong core belief of worthlessness. I went to therapy quite a few times, and many times it was unsuccessful. I wanted to treat the maladaptive behavior without addressing the core belief. Whenever the therapist wanted to discuss my childhood, I wanted to change the subject. I didn't see how it was relevant. I kept saying things like, yes, I was bullied, but why does that matter? I don't think of my bullies when I'm acting out. I don't think of my past relationships when I'm seeking attention. I only need help with the relationship I'm currently in. I was really dismissive of doing this work because I saw it all as irrelevant to the task at hand. It wasn't until I opened my mind to the process that things changed for me. It wasn't until I was able to parent my inner child and resolve her feelings of inadequacy that I could challenge and change my core beliefs about myself. And it was only then that I could open my heart not only to love, but to accept love that those around me were trying to give me for years. I needed to heal my past traumas in order to move forward. This was a very long process, and I'm not completely better yet. But at least I understand how these things work in my brain better and can see that my behavior was the result of childhood trauma that altered my core beliefs, and my defensiveness around that behavior was a false narrative I created in order to continue to indulge in my maladaptive behavior. Having this knowledge allows me to challenge my inner voices whenever they creep up and make better choices now. So now let's look at these same elements of trauma-induced behavior with Tess Holliday as the example. Remember, this is not a diagnosis. I am going to make some assumptions and guesses here, and I'm aware that I do not know the whole story. This is just me drawing parallels between what I see in her that is similar to what I have experienced myself. Okay, let's go.
Hey y'all, please ignore my dirty fucking house in the background, but I had a little thought that I wanted to share in hopes that maybe one of you guys are scrolling through and you hear what I'm about to say and you're like, damn, I needed to hear that. So I was making myself some food and I had kind of intrusive thought pop in regards to my disordered eating, but then I had a light bulb moment and I was like, damn. There's so many people that question whether or not I have, disordered eating and whether or not I struggle with anorexia. And they like to troll me often and they're usually like, oh, like you have a hard time feeding your body. And like, obviously anyone that's in, a larger body knows that we hear that all the time, right? So anyway, the thought pops into my head, like, of course I have a hard time feeding my body. I literally have been told my entire life that I don't deserve to feed my body. Like, everyone in my life has always said, are you sure you want to eat that? Don't eat that. Like, it's just constant from the moment that I was plus size, which was, 11. So I think it's pretty fucking cool that I am like starting to try and feed my body and not be hard on myself and like, it's fucking cool. Yeah, people are still going to call me fat and judge me, but whatever, man. My life's great.
Tess herself has said that she experienced childhood trauma. She had event trauma of her mother getting shot, which thankfully she survived, and she was bullied for being fat her entire life. Now, I don't know anything about her dating history other than that she was married, but if I had to guess, she likely had some bad relationships along the way. Perhaps boys she liked saying mean things to her about her weight, or boyfriends emotionally abusing her. I don't know. But if she was bullied by others, I don't think it's too big of a stretch to assume that she may also have had dysfunctional romantic relationships that also contributed to her sense of worth. Being told all your life that your body is wrong can grow into an adult believing that the world thinks that all of you is wrong. If Tess believes deep down that she's worthless and undesirable, that really sucks. Because you can't just shake those core beliefs. They stay with you wherever you go, and they make you think that people are constantly judging you. If someone bumps into you, you think they did it on purpose because they think you're worthless. If someone says a compliment, you assume it's backhanded. And if someone shows affection, you wonder what their ulterior motive is. All because the core belief of self-worth is low. When people get fed up with feeling this way, many start to overcompensate. And it looks like Tess overcompensated to the extreme. She became a world-renowned plus-size supermodel and created the F Your Beauty Standards hashtag. She was showing the world that she could still be beautiful at any size. She created a following, and her fans ate it all up, which made her overcompensate even more. But what was going on the inside? She's recently opened up a bit about her struggles with body image. A recent post on Instagram reads, "I'm going to be honest. I've been really struggling with body image in a way I've never experienced. It's been almost debilitating because even though y'all see me out having fun, it sometimes takes so much work and energy just to be able to leave the house. I'm the kind of gal that always wants my photo taken, until lately. And these are some of the first photos I've taken in a while where I saw myself in them and was kind. I'm working on it. Soaking up this family time and feeling grateful even when it's tough." These voices don't just go away. No matter what face you try to show to the world, you can't hide from yourself. In an article published earlier this year, Tess recalls when she started binge eating as a child and how it provided her with comfort. "I started using food to cope after my mother was shot when I was 10 years old. First of all, that is awful. That is really sad. And trauma can really dictate what habits we end up developing in our lives, including our relationship with food. So that is very telling, and that is very, very sad. I remember my aunt gave me a bowl of soup, and I put a whole pack of crackers in the soup, little by little. And I remember how it made me feel. I started overeating. Even though I'm from the South, where larger-bodied individuals are more common than in some other parts of the country, my family was critical of what I ate. I started hiding food. As I got older, I struggled with anorexia. I didn't know that's what it was until last year, but for over 10 years, I have restricted food." Maladaptive behaviors can temporarily calm negative feelings. Things like drug use, drinking, smoking, overeating, overexercising, sex, attention-seeking, gambling, and others can give you a little rush of excitement that seems to quell the pain of the negative core belief. And since the core belief is so strong, it feels immutable. A core belief for someone is not a hypothesis. It's a personal truth. It's not, "I think he might not be interested in me because I'm fat." It's, "I know that nobody will ever want me because I'm fat." So a maladaptive behavior, like overeating, takes the pain away, at least for a little while. Many people know that their maladaptive behavior is a coping mechanism, but life without it, well, it seems unbearable. If you try to treat only the maladaptive behavior, you will be stuck with the feelings from your core belief, and that feels so much worse than using something to deal with it, even if it's unhealthy. People recovering from alcohol use disorder have a term called a dry drunk. That's someone that white-knuckled their way to sobriety, but are still grumpy, angry, or depressed. That's because they didn't treat the root cause of their issue. Some people trade one maladaptive behavior for another. Overeaters may throw themselves into weight loss and exercise. And while this is better for their health than overeating, if they don't deal with their emotional problems at the root of the cause, things can actually get worse instead of better. If you feel that you are worthless because you are fat, then lose weight, you don't actually all of a sudden feel worthy. You may feel less worthless, but then your personal value is tied to your weight. And if you regain any weight, you feel even worse than you did in the first place. I often wonder if the people in the body positivity movement are projecting their own feelings of worth when they consistently send the message about knowing their value. I don't think external people are questioning this. I think the argument is happening from within. Of course, this is not a reason to stay in a fat body or a reason to not lose weight. Weight loss for many people is highly beneficial. But the reason for losing weight should come from an emotionally healthy place. Love yourself enough to reach a healthy weight, rather than get to a healthy weight so that you can start loving yourself. Because if you don't love yourself from the start, losing weight won't change that core belief. Because life is unthinkable without the maladaptive behavior, many people create a false narrative to protect or defend it. In Tessa's case, that would be her faux anorexia.
This morning, supermodel Tess Holliday revealing her struggle with anorexia. The mother of two saying she was recently diagnosed by a psychologist, but has ultimately been struggling with disordered eating most of her life.
I always thought that I overate. But then people in my life would say, oh yeah, I eat more than Tess. And it was almost like I wore it as a badge of honor.
Known for loving and celebrating her curves as a body-positive activist, Holliday has been receiving support for her honesty from many, but also being questioned by some online about how she could love her body and also have an eating disorder.
I've had a lot of messages from folks that are anorexic that are livid and angry because they feel like I'm lying. I am plus size, but advocating for diversity in larger bodies. And so I think for people hearing me say I'm anorexic was really jarring.
She may feel the need to protect her binge eating, so she outwardly projects that she is starving herself. This isn't true, and she knows it isn't true. But she needs to find a way to justify her behavior. Her false narrative also includes that nobody cares about fat people, which also isn't true. But she takes any evidence of this and uses it to strengthen her narrative. She can receive 1,000 positive comments and 2 messages from trolls, and will use the 2 messages as proof that nobody cares about fat people. She will twist people saying, you don't have anorexia, into, you're saying that fat people don't matter.
We don't really discuss folks that are experiencing my type of eating disorder in larger bodies, because you look at fat bodies and you just all of a sudden say, well, you're healthy and all you do is sit around and eat. But for the world to say that all I'm doing is sitting around and eat when I'm starving was horrible, because anybody, any size can starve. And we are just conditioned to not care about folks in larger bodies, to just toss us away like we don't belong, like we don't matter, and it's exhausting.
I also find it interesting that she uses the word exhausting, because from my personal experience, defending myself from hate wasn't exhausting. It was painful. But defending my lies and bad behavior, well, that was exhausting. Being called racial slurs or told you don't belong hurt. I cried a lot. Standing up for myself was difficult. It required bravery. But it wasn't exhausting. When people chose to keep their ignorant views, it was heartbreaking, hurtful, and demoralizing. But not exhausting. What was exhausting, though, was keeping up my false narrative to justify my bad behavior in relationships. The constant searching for evidence to support my weak false narrative, and the manipulating of people's words to reinforce my negative core beliefs. Now, that was exhausting. Of course, this is all my personal perspective, and there are probably lots of people that find it exhausting to fight real systemic oppression. But I do wonder why Tess omits speaking about the hurt and the pain when describing her struggles. Now, as you know, I'm not a therapist, but I do see one regularly. And one thing I've learned is that you can't solve a problem by treating the symptoms. Tess's maladaptive behavior of overeating and her false narrative that the world is against fat people and fat people can gain weight while starving themselves are the symptoms of her core belief of her own self-worth. So unless she treats the root cause, she will continue overeating and justifying it with more false narratives in the future. But alas, this is my 25-pound yo-yo, and not Tess Holliday's unhealed trauma is the root cause of her lies. So until next time, yo-yo, and let's go.